Hello guys, welcome back to the Only Recaps channel. In this video I am going to explain one of the romantic movie named Close My Eyes. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe our channel for more interesting videos and spoilers ahead. The film's story is based on a man named Richard who falls in love with his own sister. His sister gets married, but even after the marriage, they continue their relationship secretly. At the beginning of the movie, we see a man named Richard who is meeting his older sister Natalie after many years. When they were young, they had been living separately. When they meet again, his sister Natalie is very happy to see him because after their parents' departure, she had no one left. Natalie tells Richard that she recently went through a breakup and her boyfriend left her. Richard feels bad upon hearing this but tries not to show it. Meanwhile, there was a party going on near Natalie's house, and because of the noise, Richard couldn't sleep. He gets up and goes to talk to Natalie, and they end up having a deep conversation. Suddenly, during the conversation, Natalie kisses Richard. She immediately apologizes and says she was feeling lonely and overwhelmed with desire. The next day, Richard is leaving the city for work and remembers that he left his wallet at Natalie's house. He calls her to bring his wallet because if he goes back to get it himself, he might miss his train. Natalie brings him the wallet and tells him to take care of himself and to call her when he has time. A year later, Natalie calls Richard and tells him that it's been a whole year and he hasn't called her once. At that moment, Richard is with another woman, so he tells Natalie he will call her the next day. This makes Natalie angry and she hangs up. 2 years pass and we see Richard applying for a job at a construction company. He answers all the interview questions well and is likely to get the job. Later, Natalie calls him again saying 6 weeks have passed and he hasn't contacted her. She asks if he wants to meet Sinclair and Richard is confused asking who Sinclair is. Natalie explains that Sinclair is her husband and that she got married but Richard didn't attend the wedding. She then invites him to lunch at her house the next day. The following day, Richard visits her house, which is very large and beautiful. He meets Sinclair, who appears to be a bit upset with him, but the family sits down for lunch together. After lunch, Sinclair tells Richard that today is Natalie's birthday, and they all celebrate together. Richard can't stop looking at Natalie because she looks very beautiful. They talk some more, and the next day, Natalie and Sinclair visit Richard at his office. And there, Richard invites Natalie to meet him at his house. The next day, Natalie comes to Richard's house, but he gets very angry at her because she arrives quite late. At that moment, Natalie kisses Richard, which calms his anger. Now, Richard starts feeling love towards Natalie. Unable to control himself, he tries to engage with her. However, Natalie stops him and explains that she is his sister, and this isn't right. But after a while, Natalie herself starts feeling the same love, and they end up having a very intense clap. After their desire is fulfilled, Natalie tells Richard that this was their first and last mistake, and they won't repeat it again. Then Natalie tells Richard that she and Sinclair have planned a picnic for the next day, and that he will have to join them. The next day, everyone goes for the picnic. There, Richard is constantly looking at Natalie and only clicking her photos. Like a hungry wolf, Richard starts following Natalie, and she warns him to stop following her as Sinclair is around, and he will find out everything. Later, Natalie tells Richard that she has the keys to Sinclair's other house, and they can go there to spend time together. The next day, Natalie and Richard go to this other house. Natalie lies to Sinclair, saying that she's going out of town for work for a week. As soon as they arrive, they get close again and have a very intense clap. In the evening, Sinclair calls Natalie, and she lies to him, saying she found a nice hotel and is very comfortable. After that, they spend more time together and even go out for a walk. During the walk, Natalie tells Richard that he needs to find a girl soon or he will end up making her cave into a tunnel. That night, Sinclair was getting suspicious because Natalie wasn't around, so he calls all the hotels to ask about her whereabouts but finds out she isn't staying at any of them. The next day, Natalie explains to Richard again that he is her brother and she loves him as a brother. But this doesn't matter to Richard because all he cares about is clapping with her. The next day, Natalie comes home and Sinclair talks to her normally. That night, Natalie receives a phone call from Richard and he tells her that he has found a girl to clap with. Natalie doesn't respond and hangs up. After that, she sits alone and cries, indicating that she has fallen in love with Richard. The next day, Natalie comes to meet Richard, and she kisses him while telling him that he should focus only on his work. Meanwhile, Richard's boss isn't feeling well, so he goes to the hospital to meet him. The next day, Richard goes to Natalie's house to meet her, but Sinclair informs him that Natalie isn't home. After that, Sinclair takes Richard on a boat ride and tells him that he suspects Natalie is having an affair with someone else. Richard gets very worried upon hearing this because the person Sinclair is referring to is none other than him. When they return, Natalie is waiting for them. Natalie then tells Richard that Sinclair is planning to move to a new city soon. After this, Richard meets Natalie alone and asks if they are leaving because of him. Natalie doesn't give any answer to this. Later, Richard returns home and tries to overdose on sleeping pills in an attempt to end his life. However, Natalie arrives in time and saves him. The next day, Natalie takes Richard to a party, and there Richard gets very drunk and starts arguing with Natalie, eventually falling onto the street. Richard accuses Natalie of taking advantage of him. Natalie apologizes and says that she doesn't want to be apart from him, but her despicable husband is taking her away. After a while, they both return to the party, and Sinclair, seeing their condition, assumes they had an intense clap on the street. He calls them aside and says that something happened between them, but he isn't interested in knowing the details. Then the three of them continue hanging out, and as the party ends, the video wraps up. So, how did you find this movie? Please let me know in the comments, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos like this.